Well, hello. It's a pleasure to be here, and a great honor to have been invited to act as a discussant for Mr. Wada's talk. It was really inspiring to hear what the company has been doing. Very, very interesting. I thought I would just make some remarks to link his story of transformation in the gaming industry to the often sad cases of companies that find themselves in the crux of a business model transition. And it's fascinating, really, when you think of the companies that theoretically had a great position to start from in their industries, and yet in the face of these kinds of business model transitions that Mr. Wada was referring to, find themselves outmaneuvered. Find themselves no longer on top. So if you think about advertising, you know, who on the planet knows more about advertising and how consumers think and what advertisers want than Time Warner? You know, they run popular magazines, they do all kinds of content, and yet, you know, who's making all the money on advertising? And it's a game that gets played over and over again. And these examples are just a few that I could point to, but there are many. The interesting thing is it can be done. And I think Mr. Wada's pointed out some very important management principles about what one has to do. And the first one has to do with really finding those places where the user experience is less attractive than it could or should be. Here's one of my favorite examples. Loose change. Loose change. You go out shopping, right, all day long. You come back and your pockets are weighed down with loose change. What happens to it when you get home? Where does it go? The drawer, right? In my house, it follows kind of a migratory path. It starts off in the kitchen, it winds its way to the bedroom, and eventually it goes to a jar, right? It's in the jar. And the jars multiply, and over the years, you collect more jars. So how does one address this problem? Well, here's the conventional solution. You go to the bank, you get yourself some coin wrappers. If you have a willing 10-year-old at home, that's great, you get them to do it. Otherwise, you're stuck doing it yourself. You count them all up, you wrap up your change, you sign your name because, God forbid, you cheat the Bank of America out of a quarter, and you show up at the bank during working hours. Are you happy to be there? No. Are they happy to see you? No. It just cries out for an entrepreneurial solution. So into this gap comes a company called Coinstar. You may know them. They started off counting coins, then they got onto Redbox DVDs. The latest is truly good coffee in coffee machines. We'll see if they can make that work. But here's the concept. You bring your jar, you pour your money in, it counts it all up, and spits out a little receipt that you can now use to take your coins and put it in some other form. Brilliant, right? Well, what do you suppose they charge for this innovation, for this service?
$1 nickel per dollar.
$1 nickel per dollar. That would be a good guess, right? But the thing is, Americans are capable of dividing by like numbers like that, like 10%, 5%. We can do that. When you get to like 8.976523, our brains go, it must be okay, you know, it's all right. So it's like just close to 9%. Now think about the profit of this model. Nearly 9%. They charge you with very high margins to take your money and convert it into some other form. Isn't that brilliant? What are you actually buying? You're buying the user experience. You're buying the convenience. So there's a great example. Here's another one, aircraft brake shoes. How do you strategically differentiate an aircraft brake shoe? Well, I was with the team and we were exploring what causes value or lack of value for the people that buy aircraft. And it turns out that the biggest headache they have is when an airplane gets taken out of service unexpectedly. And a proportion of those occasions have to do with how the plane is flown, more specifically, how it's landed. What influences that? Pilots. So where do pilots come from? Well, there are two basic sources in the world for pilots. There are Air Force pilots, and there are Navy pilots. Air Force pilots, those of you with a military background, how do they land a plane? It's beauty, yeah, it's a symphony, right? It's gorgeous. Navy pilots? Whack! You have the distance of an aircraft carrier to work with. Well, these guys get kind of decommissioned, sent back into civilian use, and they get retrained. But over time, they start to slip. So what this company was able to do was build intelligence into their equipment that allowed the company to identify when more retraining was necessary or the airplane was actually at risk. This was some years ago. This information business has now become so big for Honeywell, the company I was working with, that today it's one of their major profit drivers in their whole business. It's creating intelligence. And again, creating an experience, even in a heavily business-to-business kind of industry, that's really different. Last example, Sealed Air Corporation, right over there in New Jersey. These are the bubble wrap people. Well, they're in innovation, and it fits very nicely with what Mr. Wada was talking about look at where the ecosystem is going. Everybody on Earth was saying that the internet is going to change retail commerce, and a lot of Sealed Air's customers are engaged in retail commerce. Well, if you're going to have the internet in retail commerce, what does that mean for packaging? A couple of very interesting things. Packaging becomes something that goes right to the consumer. It's not in the back office anymore. Packaging becomes part of the consumer's experience of the product. And packaging can't be too heavy, or the experience of internet commerce is never going to take off. So they were the first packaging company to significantly invest in innovations aimed at internet shopping. And when the internet eventually emerged as a potent force for retail, they were one of the leading companies able to capitalize on that in the world of packaging. So just as Mr. Wada said, they looked at the situation, identified where the ecosystem was going to go, and attempted to position themselves appropriately. So it can be done, and I think that's an encouraging lesson. But it's not necessarily easy to identify when a model is beginning to lose its ability to drive things forward. So the first thing I always look for is when the next generation of investment, whether it's in the power of gaming consoles, whether it's in the refinement of the product, starts to show less and less improvement in the user's experience. So a great example is Intel. Right, Intel. For years, the most important thing that Intel worried about was the speed of the chip. You know, Moore's law, faster, faster, faster chips. So we have the 286 and the 386 and the 486 and the Pentium and on and on and on. And then things change. You know? If I'd been asking you way back when, what was the dominant criterion that you used to buy a laptop? Would have been speed, overwhelmingly, say in the late 90s, overwhelmingly speed. Today, what do you look for in your laptops? Longer battery life, big bright screen, you know, can I get it in pink? I mean, whatever, right? You know, you people are so fickle. You said you wanted speed, we did speed, 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 just as you said. And now you're like, oh, make it robust, make me able to watch movies all the way to Tokyo, you know, make it friendly, I don't know. The dominant criterion change, and that very often is accompanied by a business model shift. Another big warning is when new possibilities change the basis of competition, and Mr. Wada's talked about that. So you go from competing in a big expensive machine in a bar or something to now you've got something on your handheld that's delivering nearly as rich and authentic an experience. So you need to be kind of careful about that. And industry leaders are often capable of being in denial for so long that they never take the move in time. I ran across an article published in 1994 called Video Dial Tone, and the authors of that article at that time said, oh, with these new technologies you'll be able to sell songs by the song, not by the album anymore. Well, in the music business, the whole business model rested around the album, right? 10 songs you weren't particularly interested in to get the tool that you wanted. And the interesting thing about the music business to me is that they'd been through technology transitions before. They went from, you know, cassette tapes to DVDs, from DVDs to Blu-ray, in between there was albums to digital media. But what they failed to see was that the change in the model, which would take it from an album as the unit of business to the song as the unit of business, could have completely destabilizing effects, even though it was very, very clear. So investments are producing less for us, there's some shift in the basis of competition, and then eventually it'll show up in your numbers. Now, my argument there would be by the time it's gotten there, you've got a much more difficult turnaround job to do. And it's going to be less likely that you will be successful. And of course, the poster child for that for that example at the moment would be Blockbuster. You know, here's Blockbuster, big video game company in the US, who looked great for a long time. I mean, there were case studies being taught at this esteemed business school about how fantastically Blockbuster had sort of cleaned up from the mom and the pop stores who were video game pioneers. And yet, you can see from their numbers, when the decline came, it came very quickly. And so fast that it was very hard for the company to try to retool. Now, an interesting contrast, of course, is Netflix, which has been very public about saying, we see DVD rentals by the mail going away. We see that happening. And we're paranoid about being caught in the same position Blockbuster is. Now, just to illustrate how difficult it is to manage these transitions in the way that Square Enix has been able to do, is, they made two decisions that just absolutely confused and infuriated their customers. They dramatically raised prices if you wanted both services, and for a while, they were talking about splitting up the DVD service. While this might have been the right thing to do from a technology transition point of view, it was the wrong thing to do from a customer experience point of view, and they've since had to kind of backtrack on that strategy. But the fundamental problem remains. If the business model goes from physical content, from physical media, to streamed content that users sort of consume on demand, you've still got to figure out how to manage that transition. And I think it's a very good analogy to what happened in gaming. So I found this actually on the Square Enix website, and Mr. Wada was probably too modest to mention it, but I thought this was fascinating, how clearly the organization is seeing the evolution of these new business models and where he's trying to take the company as it's looking to its future. Finally, let me close by saying some business models are inherently more attractive than others. And we forget this sometimes when we're thinking about our business. We forget to take that 2 steps back and say, what makes my model attractive or not? So, unattractive kind of business models, let me pick on Sears. It's a retailer that's struggling a fair bit here in the United States. A customer can go into Sears, it's once and done. You can go to Sears or anybody else. The operation is transactional. Many of the things you buy are sort of nice to have, they're not daily essentials. And they're trying to market themselves on things like features and technology. Whereas have a look at what Square Enix is doing. Very interesting contrast. An ongoing need or desire, right? It's sticky. Once you've started learning a game and playing it, you want to keep getting it. You want to get better. You want to see what the next thing is, especially if it's part of a network, right? It's embedded. It's part of the way I relate to my friends. It's part of the way I relate to my leisure time. It creates relationships. For many people that are into games, they're really into games. It's crucial. It's not optional. And so it's really part of something that's really important. And as Mr. Wada said, it's deeply related to the customer experience. So I'll argue the following. Just as we've seen in the case of video games and some of these other industries I've talked about, increasingly we're moving into a world where it's business model competition to business model competition rather than the conventional way we've thought about industries or product categories or anything like that. It's a really different way of thinking about competition. Many, many companies try to preserve the past for too long. They miss the threats. Even worse, they miss the opportunities. If the world is truly going networked, there are going to be huge new opportunities that open up. And I think it's very important to recognize that. So I'll close with an insight that I really thought was very keen in Mr. Wada's presentation. The time to invest in exploring new business models is before you have to. Thank you.